The election of 1836 is going to come after Andrew Jackson's 2 terms as president. So this election is different because you're going to see the Democratic Party run their candidate, Martin Van Buren, who was also Andrew Jackson's vice president, against 3 Whig candidates. So this is going to be the Whig Party's strategy to take out the Democratic Party and Martin Van Buren in this election. They feel as if they run a few different candidates around the country that it'll take down the opportunity for Martin Van Buren to win this election. But ultimately, despite the Whig Party rising in fame and becoming more powerful in politics, this doesn't work out, and Martin Van Buren and the Democratic Party are going to win with 170 electoral votes. So following Martin Van Buren's lead, you're going to see the Whig Party kind of have the votes spread amongst them, but William Henry Harrison is going to come in second with 73 electoral votes. So Martin Van Buren's going to become the 8th president, but you're really going to see him carrying a lot of Andrew Jackson's policies forward and continue a lot of the things that Andrew Jackson put in place. And ultimately, this was going to be a really bad decision and not work out well for him because he's not going to be reelected for a second term. Martin Van Buren was born to a Dutch family who owned a tavern, and this is really going to get him going in politics because he's going to be able to talk to upper class people, to lower class people, to middle class people. So he's going to be able to mingle with a lot of people, which is going to help him in politics. So during his lifetime, he's going to be in the Senate, he's going to be the governor of New York for a short amount of time, and then he's really going to rally behind Andrew Jackson and help to create this Democratic Party, ultimately becoming Andrew Jackson's vice president in his second term. So it wasn't really until Andrew Jackson's presidency that he's going to gain all this fame in the Democratic Party and then run in the election of 1836 against 3 Whig candidates. So after he runs in the election of 1836, he wins with the most electoral votes and he becomes the 8th president of the United States. And although he was really famous as Andrew Jackson's vice president, he's really not famous as the 8th president of the United States because he gets blamed for this panic of 1837 that happens as a result of Andrew Jackson's failed banking policies. He really gets the blame for this event that kind of collapsed the economy of the United States. Also, Texas at this time gets their independence from Mexico, and they want to be part of the United States, but Martin Van Buren does not bring them into the United States because he's scared that it will throw off the balance between the slave states and the free states, and he really doesn't want to continue the spread of slavery. So this is going to be another thing that makes him a controversial president. Also, he has to deal with these foreign issues with Britain that are going to surface during his presidency, issues that we'll talk about in the next slide, but he's not always the most hands-on dealing with issues with the economy and with foreign affairs. So ultimately, in the election of 1840, he's going to lose to the Whig candidate William Henry Harrison and go down as really not the most popular president. During Martin Van Buren's presidency, he's going to have to deal with conflict between the United States and Britain. And ultimately, this conflict is going to end up with the signing of the Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842 that's going to maintain this alliance and this friendship between these two nations. But before this treaty comes about, he has a lot to deal with. So he has the Caroline Affair and the Aroostook River War. Let's first start with the Caroline Affair. So the Caroline Affair started because people in British Canada were ready for independence and they no longer wanted to be under British rule. So with this being said, they're going to board this American steamship called the Caroline that aided rebels in British Canada. And they're going to get aboard and basically enter this Niagara River water. And they're going to kind of move towards the American side of this water. And this is where things become problematic because British forces are going to send the Canadian militia underneath British rule to go take care of this situation. And when they find the Caroline, it's going to be on the American side of the Niagara River. So they're going to set fire to the Caroline. And this is going to kill one American person in the process. So obviously this is going to become a deeper situation now that one American life is lost. So both sides are going to be angry at this. The Americans are going to be angry because obviously there was an American death on their side of the Niagara River at the hands of the British people. But then on top of it, the British are going to claim that the United States was supplying these rebels on the Caroline and aiding them in their rebellion against the British. And this is going to become this issue about when does a nation get to use self-defense in the way that the British did in this situation? When is enough in this case? And when is it going too far? So all of these issues are going to be resolved in this Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842. But in the meantime, this was an issue that Martin Van Buren had to deal with before it culminated and snowballed into more. On the other hand, he also had to deal with this Aroostook River War. So this was going to be another border dispute that he had to deal with. So kind of a gray area that wasn't decided by the Treaty of Paris after the American Revolutionary War and wasn't decided by the Treaty of Ghent after the War of 1812 either. So this was going to deal with this boundary between the British Canadian land of New Brunswick and the United States state of Maine. So both sides claimed this territory was theirs, and you're going to see a lot of chaos happening because the Canadians and the Americans are going to both be living on this land, claiming it's theirs, arresting people who they thought were trespassing, and this was going to hurt them both economically and socially and cause a lot of violence and really just chaos in these lands. So basically, you're going to see that John Fairfield, who was the governor of Maine, is going to ask President Van Buren to send somebody to make sure that there is a truce. So Van Buren's going to send General Winfield Scott to resolve this issue, and ultimately this issue gets resolved, and this is going to form into the Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842, where finally these borders are going to be defined between New Brunswick and the United States states of Maine and in places of Oregon, and now we're going to know for sure whose land belongs to who, and we're going to avoid a conflict between Britain again. The first few months of Martin Van Buren's presidency are really awesome economically. So there's this huge economic boom in 1836 and things are looking up, but then in 1837 there is a huge depression, and this is called the Panic of 1837. So if we remember talking about Andrew Jackson's presidency, we remember something called the Bank War and how he absolutely despised the federal banking system. He's going to veto the federal bank's recharter and basically take the money out and put them in state pet banks. And he's going to implement specie circular, so you can only pay for things with gold and silver. And this is basically going to depreciate the value of money. This is going to cause inflation, and this is going to make it so you can't really pay certain things back. And this is going to make it so the economy is going to collapse. So profits, prices of cotton and other goods, they're going to drop. Wages are going to drop. Unemployment and inflation are going to skyrocket. Banks are going to close down. So all of these pet banks and these state banks are going to end up closing down. Infrastructure such as canals and bridges and railroads are going to be left unfinished because they can't pay back these loans. And people were going to be hungry and rioting because of this Panic of 1837. So although this was a result of Andrew Jackson's banking policies, this specie circular, not paying for things with banknotes, Martin Van Buren is going to get the blame for this situation because this panic is going to last from 1837 until the mid-1840s. So the entirety of his presidency, he's dealing with this panic of 1837, and he doesn't really do it very well. You don't see many economic improvements during his presidency, and this is going to be a huge reason that he loses this election of 1840 to William Henry Harrison. The election of 1840 is between the Democratic Party and the Whig Party once again. So we're going to see Martin Van Buren running underneath the Democratic Party again, and William Henry Harrison is going to come back as a Whig candidate, but he's going to be the only Whig candidate this time. So the Whig Party learned their lesson. Their strategy in the election of 1836 didn't really work out for them, so they're only going to run one candidate, and that's William Henry Harrison. And this election's interesting because you're going to see a different sort of campaigning. So this campaigning is really going to be appealing to the American people rather than talking about their platforms and their policies. They're really going to want to seem buddy-buddy with the people in the United States and show that they can connect with them. So William Henry Harrison's campaign is going to take the slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So if we remember the Battle of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison was really a war hero during that time. He beat Tecumseh at the Battle of Thames, so he's already a war hero. He's a decorated war hero at this time, so people love him for that. And he's going to introduce his vice president, John Tyler, when he says Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And he's also really going to appeal to the American public with something called the Log Cabin and Cider campaign. So he's going to use hard cider, so alcohol, and this visual of log cabins to make himself seem like a Westerner who's down to earth, who's very middle class, and he's going to appeal to the common man the same way Andrew Jackson did by appealing to these sort of things. And this is really going to connect him with the common man and make it so he's going to make the American public feel like Martin Van Buren is not connected to them as well. So this is where things get really tricky and kind of interesting, because this is so not true. William Henry Harrison was not a common man. He was actually extremely wealthy, and Martin Van Buren was the one who was more middle class and could connect more as a son of a tavern owner with these people in the United States who were considered the common man. So William Henry Harrison is kind of going to flip the reality on its head, but this is going to work out really well for him, because William Henry Harrison is going to become the 9th president with 234 electoral votes, and Martin Van Buren loses with only 60 electoral votes. So this is going to be an awesome victory for William Henry Harrison and the first Whig candidate to become president, but it's not going to be a long victory because he's going to die only 31 days into his presidency. This is a really exciting time for this Whig Party because they've already been on the up and up in politics and becoming more popular, but now they finally had a Whig candidate in the White House. So William Henry Harrison was clearly super excited because he decided to make a 2-hour inauguration speech, which ended up kind of biting him in the butt because he died 31 days into his presidency from pneumonia. So historians say these two things aren't connected, and he would have died from pneumonia and gotten sick weeks afterward anyway. But regardless, he made this long speech. He died 31 days into office, and the country was stuck in this kind of constitutional crisis, figuring out what the heck they do next, because this has never happened before. So John Tyler is going to come in as the 10th president because he was vice president to William Henry Harrison, so he was going to step up in his place and now become the 10th president of the United States. So this is where things get really tricky, because John Tyler claimed that he was a Whig candidate, just like William Henry Harrison. But when he becomes president, it becomes really obvious that he truly wasn't a Whig at all. He disagreed with everything that the Whig candidates really believed in, that the Whig Party really believed in. And you're going to see a lot of the Whig Party turn their back on him. Most of his cabinet is going to resign right after his presidency starts, and he's going to go down as one of the worst presidents of the United States ever. And I mean, you can really tell that he's going to go down as one of the worst presidents of the United States, because when the Civil War breaks out a few years later, he actually takes the side of the Confederacy against the United States. So John Tyler was really not one of the most popular presidents at all. The Second Great Awakening was a Protestant religious revival in America. So you're going to see this new faith in America that was kind of forgotten for a little while after the American Revolutionary War. Less people were going to church, less people had faith at this point, and the country was turning the corner and coming back around to being a very religious nation. And this was going to make America sort of the religious nation that they forgot that they were. So you're going to see people like Charles Grandison Finney, who are going to exemplify what it means to be part of the Second Great Awakening in the 1830s and 1840s. So Charles Grandison Finney would gather large camps, emotional gatherings of people, and he would worship and he would speak of faith and the importance of religion. And he would do this in places like New York, but this would spread out throughout the nation, and this would be a domino effect that would affect all other things. So the Second Great Awakening really instilled values in people, that you had individual choice in your salvation. So you had a duty to yourself to avoid temptation, to better yourself, to find the goodness in people, but also this could go outward. So you could help to improve your community and society in America as a whole. This was going to create things like utopian movements and new denominations of the religion. So people were going to break away from society in order to follow their own faith and to create their own meaning of life. But also new denominations of the religion are going to sprout up, and there's going to just be this infectious feeling of faith and kind of serving yourself and being individual in the way that you connect with your faith, religion, and God. So the Second Great Awakening and this new religious revival is really going to appeal to this new forming middle class, but also it's really going to appeal to women in the United States, and they are going to channel this in other ways. And this is going to snowball into something that we call the reform movement during this time. And they're going to think, if we can reform ourselves, then we can also reform other parts of American society and make American society better as well. So you're going to see the reform movement born out of this, the temperance movement, the abolition movement, the women's rights movement, the labor rights movement, the education movement, and the movement to help build up asylums and places for the mentally ill. So the Second Great Awakening was really important religiously, but it was also important for the entire society of the United States. When we talked about the Second Great Awakening, we talked about how it was a religious movement that helped instill values in people that were going to better themselves, but also it was going to have this domino effect and make people want to better the society around them. So out of this idea, you're going to see the reform movements of the 1830s and 1840s sprout up, and these movements are going to keep going throughout American history and keep improving things in American society as time goes on. So some of the movements we're going to look at during this time are the temperance movement, the movement to better asylums and hospitals, the movement to better educational facilities, the abolition movement, the women's rights movement, the labor reform movement. And these are all really important and they're worth spending a lot of time on, but we're going to talk about these a lot in class, so I'm only going to briefly go over them and a few important people now. So the temperance movement really focused on getting rid of alcohol. So during this time, American society was kind of drowning in alcohol, and this was a really drunken time in American history. And women and Protestants were a really big part of thinking that if alcohol were gone, society and families in society and marriages in society would be better as a whole. So out of this temperance movement, you're going to see the American Temperance Society form, and important people like Frances Willard get behind this idea and really try and get it off the ground and get rid of alcohol in society. So next, we're going to see this movement to better asylums and hospitals for the mentally ill. So they were really focused on how they were going to help the mentally ill in society and how they were going to improve the conditions in these asylums and in these hospitals so these people had a chance at rehabilitation. So prior to this, people were really focused on just confining these people and treating them like they weren't human beings. But now you're going to see people like Dorothea Dix saying that, we need to increase these people's chances to rehabilitate themselves instead of just confining them and treating them like they're not human beings. We need to give them a safe environment to basically increase their chances of becoming better. So this is something that's also going to be rooted in the Second Great Awakening and these ideas that you can better yourself from the inside. So when we move forward, we're going to see the education movement next. People like Horace Mann are going to be really focused on creating something called the common schools, which is going to relate a lot to what we see now in public schools. So this is basically schooling for everyone. So prior to this, you're only going to see the rich and the really talented going to schools, but they're saying that, by making school for everyone, now everyone has a chance in society. Now everyone can better themselves and really claw themselves out of the social class that they are in currently. So they're going to fight for more supplies, more social equality in schools, and more training for teachers. So next we're going to see the abolition movement, and this is really exploding, and this is a big deal at this time period because previous to this, we know that slavery has been a dividing issue, the reason behind a lot of sectionalism in the country, and now the abolition movement is really going to explode. So we know that slavery has already been an issue, but now there's going to be different ways to look at abolition. So some people are going to say that they should send these slaves back to Africa because they can't live amongst regular white Americans. But then you're also going to see radical abolitionists during this time saying that no, we can integrate these freed slaves into society. If we free them from slavery, they should be integrated and allowed to live in society the same way white individuals should. So you're going to see American Anti-Slavery Society pop up as a result of this. People are really going to get behind the idea that it is racist to send these people back to Africa and say they can't live here with us. They should be able to live amongst us. We need to get rid of slavery and allow them to be part of our society and to contribute to our society. So important figures in this movement are Frederick Douglass, Lloyd Garrison, the Grimke sisters, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, which are all people that we could look into more. So as a result of the abolition movement, I would think as a result of, but it was already on the up and coming anyway, the women's rights movement is going to explode during this time. So they're going to realize that they're fighting for the oppressed with the temperance movement, the asylum, the hospital movement, the education, the abolition movement, the labor reform movement, but they also need to fight for themselves because women are also oppressed in society. Women want to vote, they want divorce rights, they want to be able to own land and property, they want to participate in the market economy, they want to have these jobs, and they want to contribute to society as well. So this is really middle and upper class focused. During this time period, you're going to see this middle class really become a thing, but middle and upper class women are really going to be focused on getting this right to vote and making an impact in society. So the Seneca Falls Convention is going to happen as a result of this. People are going to be really focused on showing that women do have this right to society. They are educated because they have to educate their children to be members of society. So why should they not be allowed to? So important figures in this are the Grimke sisters, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Susan B. Anthony, who we can look more at in class. And lastly, and this is very important, is the labor reform movement during this time. So in the 1830s, 1840s, and moving forward, industrialization is exploding in the United States. Factories are really going to be exploding. Agricultural is still a way of life, but now you're going to see industrialization really taking over. And with this, you're going to see more people working in these factories. And these working conditions are absolutely horrible, especially for the women in the factories. There's long hours, there's low wages, and it's really just unsafe to work in these factories. So these middle class women who are working in these factories and these lower class women are really going to get together and decide that they need labor unions to protect them from all these horrible conditions. So some really important figures that you're going to see are Sarah Bagley and some other really important women who are going to make these steps. So as you can see, there are important men who are involved in these reform movements, but women do have a very big part in reform movements at this time, and that's something we'll focus more on in class as well. So during the first half of the 19th century in the United States, we're going to see something called the market revolution. And this is going to completely change the economy and the way of life in the United States. So prior to this, we knew that sectionalism is happening. The northern states are industrial. You're seeing factories and them producing their own goods. But you're also seeing that the South is really stuck in their agricultural ways. So there's still going to be focus on agriculture, but now things are going to be changing. People are going to decide to make a surplus of the things they're already making. So prior to this, you're going to see people just making just enough to feed themselves and maybe a few people in their area. But now people are going to be making in surplus and they're going to be making things for profit. And with this being said, you're going to see agriculture, industry in the north, transportation that is new and up and coming, and new technology all working together to connect the economy in all parts of the United States. And this is going to change basically everything. So because of this, you're going to see this new middle class forming. And the reason the middle class is forming is because these new industrial places, such as factories, to make all these new goods and to connect all the goods in the United States, they're going to need people to work there. And now you're going to see the middle class who work in these factories and help with industrialization forming. And with that being said, you're also going to see this new urbanization of these places where industrialization is taking place. So in these northern cities, you're going to see this new type of city, this new type of urban living developing. There's going to be immigrants living there. There's going to be women who are working in these factories to gain their own independence. And this is going to cause a very different atmosphere in the United States, particularly in the northern United States. So with that being said, it's important to realize that behind every innovation, there's going to be brilliant minds. So we're going to see Samuel Slater and Francis Cabot Lowell, who are going to be behind this innovation of factories, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But without their innovations, we wouldn't get these factories and this more industrial life that's going to pop up in the South and completely change the entirety of the country. So we talked about in the last slide how there's a market revolution going on in the United States during this time. So the United States is really industrializing itself. We're going to see that there's cities popping up, there's immigrants coming to work in these new industrial places, people are urbanizing, they're living very compacted in cities during this time. And also there's a middle class that's coming out of this new industrial way of living in the United States. People are working in these factories. Women are getting their independence and working in these factories. And this is going to create a surplus of money for the middle class and also a surplus of goods that people can exchange and have. And this is things that weren't able to be done prior to this. People didn't have a surplus of money or goods. People weren't able to do leisurely things outside of what they normally did. But now we were able to do that, and this is going to lend itself to this new capitalistic society that we're moving into and that we have now. But we wouldn't be able to have this explosion of the market and this new urbanization and this new industrialization if it wasn't for the transportation and innovation that we're going to see popping up during this time period in the first half of the 19th century. So there's a few important things we need to talk about, like factories, roads, canals, steamboats, bridges, and railroads, but we'll go into those one by one. So first things first, factories are super important because although they're typically mostly in the northern states, they completely changed the entire country of the United States. So there's two men that are really behind the factories and what they did for the United States, Samuel Slater and Francis Cabot Lowell. So Samuel Slater, this is super interesting because he used to live in Britain, and Britain liked to keep their textile mill factory ideas really under wraps. They didn't want other countries to know how they were able to accomplish this industrial revolution. But Samuel Slater decided that he was going to leave Britain and bring these ideas to the United States and implement them in the northern industrial states, and that's exactly what he did. And with the help of Francis Cabot Lowell, who decided interchangeable parts can be mass produced in these factory systems, these two people are going to basically mesh their ideas together to create a really industrial, exploding, urbanized way of life in the United States that's going to change the economy completely. So factories are a big deal, but the mass production of all these goods in the factories really would not be able to move around the country if it wasn't for these new transportations that were popping up during this time. So having the goods is great, but if you're not able to transport these goods around the country, then it's kind of useless. So you're going to see things like roads, canals, bridges, and railroads popping up, and they're all going to help trade and really change the country and make it more progressive. So you're going to see something called the Cumberland Road, which is the national road in the United States, popping up. So turnpikes are going to become a thing. Now you're going to have connecting roads from state to state, which really wasn't able to be done before. States weren't really fond of making the effort to connect their roads to other states. But now this is being done, and trade's going to become way more efficient because of it. We talked about the Erie Canal, and we talked about the Era of Good Feeling, but now you're going to see more canals popping up, and water travel is going to be more efficient, more cheap, and it's going to be an awesome way to get goods from one side of the country to the other and connect all of the economies of the different parts of the country. Also, bridges are going to be popping up, which are going to allow people to travel over these waterways in order to continue on the roads. Railroads are going to become a huge innovation during this time. Railroads are going to be a much faster way to be able to trade. This is going to take a lot of the attention off of canals and onto railroads, and this is going to be arguably one of the most important innovations in the American economy that ever happened.